Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining the Behind Company Lines podcast. Today we have Mehul Bhatt, co-founder and CEO of FloCareer. FloCareer is an an innovative interview as a service HR tech platform that helps companies across the globe hire talent faster and easier at scale while reducing interviewing overhead. Mehul, I'm so excited to chat with you, not only to dive into your career and your background and your experiences, but also FloCareer, this interesting kind of ecosystem around interviewing and this whole kind of probably one of the biggest headaches for a lot of founders is building teams. And a lot of that goes into evaluating the type of individual and making that process efficient when you have all these other priorities at hand. And before we get into FloCareer and how you've kind of created a more faster and scalable process, what were you doing before you started the company?
Sure, Julian. Thanks a lot for having me here. Really glad to be part of your show. Before starting FloCareer, I have always been a techie.
Yeah.
I have always been a hardcore developer. And interestingly, in my previous work experiences, I had almost 16 years of experience before I jumped into FloCareer.
Yes.
I never become even a manager during my entire career. I had always been an individual contributor, a tech lead, architect, but never a people manager.
Yeah.
So that has been my history. I have been a developer essentially.
Yeah. And you've worked at some pretty substantial companies. I'm curious, in terms of like one thing as founders scale and build out their teams, whether it's the engineering team or not, I think the engineering team probably is the lifeblood of a lot of companies because of obviously, especially companies like SaaS companies who have a service or a product. How do big companies structure the team well to create a really cohesive kind of unit and organism to be able to not only take objectives and build features and complete milestones, but also to keep people kind of integrated within that team and inundated on the culture and everything like that? Because it's hard once you have a few different personalities and things kind of become dispersed, teams get larger. But what do large companies do well structurally that you've seen in your experience and that you've taken maybe even to FloCareer that helps teams run efficiently and effectively?
Sure. Yeah. I think people are the most important assets of any organization. I mean, ultimately all about people. So finding the right set of people, making sure that they are all aligned and they are all motivated to do a work that is a common goal of the company, right? That's essentially critical. I was fortunate enough to work with two startups which really grew quite big. One got acquired by Cisco, another grew really big, became public company. And I've seen that journey personally, where a small team comes together, becomes either part of a much larger ecosystem, or they grow organically to become big and kind of serve much bigger purpose and much bigger audience. Yeah. What really helps is from starting, people are really clear on the purpose of and the mission of the organization, right? Why are we here? What motivates them to come on Monday morning and come to the work and continue flying through the hurdles of the week and the days and the months, right? That's very, very important, right?
Yeah.
So have that clarity of the purpose, why exactly we are here, and then giving them autonomy to do what they are doing. Those combinations really helps a lot.
Yeah. And thinking about the whole interview process and getting talent and vetting talent and making sure that you have the right people and your experience on other teams before even FloCareer, where did you see the interview process? I don't want to say broken, but maybe not necessarily hitting the objectives or hitting the goals that they're looking for. And this is not maybe, and I think a lot of people should take a step back, and it's not about the skill set somebody has, because that's different than somebody fitting within a certain team or organization when at least you're building an initial core team. And as you build core teams of different organizations on, what did you see in the process that wasn't necessarily accurate or inefficient or just not achieving the outcomes that you want in the interview process in your experience before FloCareer?
Yeah. So I was always on the other side of the table before FloCareer in terms of the hiring team side, right?
Yeah.
And some of the observations that we always had was, number one, a lot of resumes that comes to the table of the hiring manager, they are not relevant. And we come to know, not while looking at the resume, because that's what the HR team has already done that. And they find the resumes to be quite great.
Yeah.
But when you talk to the candidates, you come to know that, okay, that's not really a right fit, right? So people claim all sort of things on the resumes, but when you talk to them, you come to know that whether they are really a fit for your team or not, right? That wastes a lot of time of hiring teams, right? The second thing we were always facing was that people literally waving the resume and saying, hey, who can take this person's interview? The guy is already in the room and I don't have time. So, who can do that? That results into a lot of unstructured approach towards interviewing, right?
Yeah.
So that's another opportunity that we saw that, okay, this is something that we can add value, right? And last but not least, after going through so many interviews, it's still sometimes companies have mishires, right?
Yeah.
So all of those clutter and all of those chaos around interviewing while recognizing that the people are most important asset of any company, right?
Yeah.
And pretty much all companies understand that, acknowledge that, but there are very few tech giants who take interviewing really seriously and the structure of the interview, right? So we saw that gap and we thought that there's something that we can add value here.
Yeah. And just to give the audience a little bit more context, describe FloCareer and how you've been able to create a really kind of interview as a service product that allows teams to do a lot of things that are, say, pretty standardized across the interview process, do it efficiently and effectively so they can get to the core value of that interviewing, which is seeing if they're the fit within the team, their skill set and their experience and what their motivations and their goals are. Describe FloCareer a little bit more and how you've been able to kind of standardize and give companies kind of a hack to doing it efficiently and sometimes asynchronous and not having to have so much manual labor on that and what that really means to companies.
So you can think of us as Uber of interviewing, literally. Right? So we have gig workers, we have freelancers across the globe, in fact. So that's another beauty that we have, that we can tap into the resources across the globe, right? So these gig workers are the ones who would take the interviews on behalf of the hiring team, right?
Yeah.
And as soon as you have that element that a third party, a freelancer is taking the interview, immediately the concerns from the hiring team is that, well, will those people be able to take the interviews in the same fashion that we are taking these interviews, right?
Yeah.
That led us to an essential element of our journey, which was structuring these interviews, right?
Yeah.
We developed very specific structure around interviewing, which when we present it to the hiring team, they realize that they themselves don't have such structure in place for their own interviewers. So many times they take the same structure and apply to their own internal interviewing also, because we are not the final interviewers for any candidate. We take first couple of round of interviews and then final call is always with the hiring team, right? So think of us as an Uber. Instead of hiring team taking the first few round of interviews, the freelancers across the globe take these interviews. Yeah. Interviews are structured. It also helps the companies from DE&I perspective, because now it's not that, okay, I'm favoring some kind of people because I have certain affinity with that group or not.
Sure.
Right? Now, everybody goes through some standardized process and companies get a much consistent output because of that. But that helps them a lot, right? So that in a nutshell is what we do. We kind of Uberize it, standardize it, and that helps companies conduct interviews faster, because now you are tapping into a much bigger resource pool across the globe, right?
Yeah.
We conduct at times almost 2,000 interviews a day, right?
Yeah.
So if there is let's assume a team of 10 people who want to hire 3 more people, right? That would result roughly 45 to 60 interviews.
Yeah.
We can do that in a day, right? Which a team of 10 within the organization, it would be a big challenge for them to kind of take the time away from their primary job and just conduct interviews. They're not going to do that ever. Right? So that's how we bring the velocity to the companies.
Yeah. It's so fascinating thinking about companies like yourself who take, say, a core job function. I don't want to say away, but they essentially create a system or product or service around that job function. Particular, this is interviewing, but having a company adopted or having a team adopted that is that core responsibility of theirs obviously is met with a lot of friction sometimes, as people think that they have that ownership and it's hard to relinquish it. How have you been able to communicate the value that it does add to teams that have that core responsibility, and the fact that it'll give them back that time to, say, do other more important or high-level tasks, strategic tasks, or even more detail-oriented tasks back to their schedule? How do you communicate the value and kind of ease into those teams who are seeing it as friction and relinquishing some of that ownership? what is the challenge there, and how have you been able to overcome it?
That's a great question, Julian, because when we started, I have always worked in startups and the product companies, so to speak, right? In the high tech domain. So when I started FloCareer, I was always under impression that, okay, it would be the product companies who would value the time of their engineers the most and adapt to this process.
Yeah.
But surprisingly, a lot of services industries companies were the first to jump on using our services and our platform.
Yeah.
Because for services companies or the contract companies who bill their customers on an hourly basis, for their leaderships, they had this Excel spreadsheet in front of them that how many hours of my engineers are billable.
Yeah.
We are charging our customers for our own engineers, right? And they saw that interviewing is a big overhead. And we did not hire our own engineers to interview other engineers, but we hired them to, deliver the products to our end customers, right? So they were the first one to jump to use our platform and our services. But later we were able to convince a lot of product companies also after seeing the success with the services industry that, hey, you also value your engineers' time, but their apprehension usually was, will you guys be able to do the interviews the same way we are doing the interviews? Because most product companies think that, okay, our style is very unique, right?
Sure.
And when we show them our processes, when we show them the entire structuring of the interviews and so on and so forth, right? They really get really impressed and, they are willing to try it out. Once they try it and then they realize that, okay, this helps me a lot. Now, instead of conducting 15 interviews to close one position, I just have to do 3 or 4 interviews.
Yeah.
And the hiring team can engage with those people in a deeper way because now they have more time to work with them. They can engage with good leads in a better way, which yields them better results.
Yeah.
So yes, you're right. It is definitely a journey. We need to win their confidence to help them realize that, yes, we can do as good of a job as their team, if not better, right? And then they are still in control to make the final decision.
Right.
So yes, that has been a journey, and it's a matter of working with the engineering leadership, explaining them our processes, and making sure that they are on the same page.
Yeah. One thing that you just mentioned that I think is particularly really interesting is product teams or product companies who have, say, a unique, I use air quotes there because a lot of times the uniqueness of the interview process is the tests that they give developers, for instance, and have them go through, right, that are related to their product in some way or degree, but it's not always successful, right? Like we've been testing kind of come in, there's 2 camps on that, whether you should say give a test to a developer or not, or should you do a code pairing session, how much time to allocate. There's all these variables that companies kind of think about when hiring talent, but in my experience, they don't always do it right. And I guess I'm curious if you were to just generalize it, what recommended interview structure would you recommend to other founders who may not need the volume that FloCareer comes with, but are looking to kind of set some kind of standard so that they can start bringing in talent and evaluating at a really kind of successful level where they find the right talent for their team? What generalized structure would you recommend to other founders out there?
Sure. So, again, if you think about what are the best practices in terms of asking the right set of questions to the interviewers, by the interviewers to the candidate, right? Especially if you are hiring senior folks or mid-level folks, not like fresh out of the college.
Yeah.
You need to have your interviews much more interactive in terms of real hands-on experiences and whatnot, right? And that's where many times we see the gap in companies' interview processes where, techies, usually they have their own favorite interview questions and they keep asking the same questions, right? Because again, they were not hired to structure the interview or coming up with more content or good interview questions and whatnot, right? So they keep asking the same question that which are their favorite questions, which eventually gets leaked on the Glassdoor and any other platforms online, right? So what we do is we ask our interviewers to come up with a good scenario-based interview questions, right? Just to give a very simple example, right? One technical example is if you ask anybody, how to make pasta, they can recite a recipe, right?
Right. Right.
Get the pasta, boil it, add the sauce, and you are done, right? Anybody can tell them. But what we encourage our interviewers is looking at their own work and see what kind of problems they faced in last few months, right? And from that, coming up with a good set of interview questions. So we have, in the same pasta example, let's say somebody is making pesto pasta.
Sure.
They had so much of a sauce, so much of a pesto sauce and not enough pasta, and they're at home. There's no chance of buying more pasta immediately. How would you fix that? A good chef will be able to fix that. They will say, okay, in that case, I will probably boil some broccolis and add it to the mix so that, it will neutralize the strong pesto sauce, right? If I don't have enough pasta. So these are the real life problems. Only if you have worked on it, you will know that, okay, I face this problem and this is how I usually have solved in my past life, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So similarly, we have now almost close to 50,000 questions across like 300 plus skills where these people have, gone back to their own problems that they faced, come up with a good interview questions. And we keep refreshing these questions, right? Because sooner or later, this will get leaked out there on the internet. So we have certain matrices. We use those. Okay, if the same question has been asked more than n number of times, then retire those questions, right? So that's what I advise people who want to structure the interview, that look at the skills that you want to evaluate the candidate and look at the real life examples. How would you test their abilities by writing some code snippets and not like quite testing them, but as you mentioned, the pair programming, right? You kind of, the way you work in a daily environment at work, but you are not constantly testing the other person. You are just challenging them with some problems. Let them go out, do their research. They can refer to things. We don't want them to remember things, right? We want them to solve a problem. So real practical scenario-based questions, using them, can they solve a real life problem? Yes. Then those are the people who can be your great asset.
Yeah. It's so interesting thinking about not only just the past example, but also the utilizing real life scenarios that you've had within your company to really get to someone's thought process. And it's a lot of times that's what people really care to understand, and how you solve a problem, what your process is behind that in terms of the information you're grabbing, where do you go, how resourceful are you? They are within those scenarios versus that elicit some sort of response, almost kind of give you a template of how to respond versus offering some level of creativity that doesn't have that structure. But how do you collect that information and then communicate whether, if you do it in your interview process, how do you score answers like that in a way that you're really accurately recording their level of, whether it's aptitude or critical thinking or whatever attribute? How do you record those out of those kind of more open-ended answers?
That's again a great question, because interviews are mostly subjective, right?
Yeah.
How do you bring more objectivity out of it, right? That's the question, right? So what we do is we kind of have a community program for all of our freelancers where we engage with them. We explain this perspective to them. We help them come up with good interview questions, and not just a question, but a grading guidelines. How would you evaluate the candidate? What kind of answers will deserve full marks, right? And when would you give the next level of the categories, right? When would you give 4 out of 5 star, for example, right?
Yeah.
So bringing that structure into the place, not just the questions, but what is the grading guidelines? That's an essential part of that interview structuring.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about FloCareer and what's been exciting about the traction you have so far, and what are you particularly excited about in terms of the next chapter of the journey of FloCareer?
Sure. So despite a lot of news nowadays about the FANG companies laying off people and whatnot, right? There are always this conflicting information out there in the market, right? That, okay, despite people laying off a large number, like Facebook laying off people, Google laying off, Microsoft laying off people. Yeah. And at the same time, you get the job market report, which says job market is still strong, right? What we have seen in this quarter is just ending today, right? And we just had a quarter over quarter quick review. The final numbers will be compiled next week, of course. But quarter over quarter here in US, we have seen strong growth for this quarter. So we were just talking today that we can become that beacon of hope for a lot of people, right? We did a lot of touring of our customers in January or so, right?
Yeah.
And we have seen, interestingly, if I can quantify, right? In Bay Area, we saw a lot of pessimism because of a lot of bank companies were laying off there. And you always hear, oh, my friend got laid off and this and that. But outside of the Bay Area, we saw a lot of optimism on the job market, right?
Yeah.
And we have seen the growth. We continue to see the growth in the next quarter. That's our expectation.
Yeah.
And what we are excited about the future is that when we talk to our freelancers, right? We have the two arms on the freelancer side. They come to us and let us know that I'm not worried even if I get laid off tomorrow, because I have this great secondary source of income now, which I can depend on, right? And that gives a really good sense of satisfaction.
Yeah.
Because when you are able to build that ecosystem for people, which helps companies as well as individuals, right? That gives you that sense of purpose, right?
Yeah.
So in terms of our journey, we are looking for strong growth in US this year and expanding to multiple different segments beyond technology too is what we are looking at.
Yeah. I know there's a lot of external factors and feel free to you comment on those, but also internally, if you were to think about external and internal, what are some of the biggest risks that FloCareer faces today?
That's a great question. In terms of the risks, I would say that whenever anybody or especially investors look at the companies, they look at three things, right? Is the problem that you are trying to solve is real? Is it a real problem that you face, right? Number two, is there a big enough market? Are a large number of people facing that problem or not, right? And number three, the solution that you are providing is scalable to kind of meet the requirement, right? And if we look at all these three things, right? Is hiring an issue is hiring a real issue? Of course it is. Everybody knows that, right? Ask anybody, they say, yeah, we have a problem finding the right people. And it's a large enough problem and our solution does scale. So my concern always has been that the people who solve the problem for us, our freelancers, right? Their engagement with the process, their engagement and their bandwidth and their motivation to work with us, right? That has to be there at all the time. And that I see as a risk, because if they get disengaged for some reason, then we would have trouble, right? We won't be able to satisfy the needs of our customers because demand is huge. We need to make sure that, people who are working for us are engaged and motivated, right?
Yeah.
So that's where we spend a lot of energy internally to make sure that they are engaged. We keep giving them programs, not only just the monetary benefits, but beyond that, what all we can do for them so that they are motivated.
Yeah. And if everything goes well, what's the long-term vision?
The long-term vision for us is making sure if interview as a service becomes a norm across anybody's hiring plan, right? Like today, the applicant tracking system in an HR tech is a norm, right? You cannot imagine any HR functioning without an ATS, right? Like interview as a service is still a greenfield. A lot of companies are adapting to that, but it is not completely widespread. So we would like to make sure that becomes household, like not a household, but every company would think about it that, okay, who is going to be my interview as a service partner in hiring?
I was like, the next question I call my founder FAQ. So I'm going to hit you with some rapid fire questions and we'll see where we get. So I always like to open up first question. What's particularly hard about your job?
What's hard about my job?
Yeah.
I would say it is time management, right?
Yeah.
Amount of time is restricted and that there's so much things that you want to do. So you need to stay focused and make sure that bucketize things correctly and do it on time.
Yeah. And I was like thinking more about FloCareer. It's almost like you've created like a capture network for interviews for candidates, right? It's a capture network in the sense that you have a lot of different interviewers validating the person's experience, skills, and overall maybe impression and ability to do the work or responsibility at the company that you're servicing. How many interviews does a candidate go through per job? And then also, how do you keep those interviewers kind of up to date and trained, being that that's such a high value add to the overall system, and it kind of is dependent on the quality of the interviewers being able to vet the right skills and things that are talent. So two questions there is how many interviews per candidate? And secondly is how do you keep the quality of the interviewer high?
Sure. And I'll give you a third one also, very interesting statistics. So how many interview rounds per job? It varies from companies to companies a lot. Minimum 3 I have seen, and maximum goes up to 8 also.
Yeah.
We only take care of the first 2 or 3 rounds on our platform. Fastest turnaround I have seen is 2 rounds on our side and 1 manager round, and that's it.
Yes.
That's the fastest.
Okay.
Quality depends on 2 aspects. Do we have a good interviewers and do we have a good interview structure and questions, right? So these are the 2 critical parts of our solution. And we have evolved with a lot of processes and technology to ensure that both are good. But a very interesting observation on our platform is that these candidates, we don't source the candidate. The candidates are provided by the hiring team, right? So the same candidate might have interviewed for 2 different hiring companies.
Yeah.
We cannot share the data across them because like it's completely owned by the companies and the candidates, right? Now, so we just want to make sure that the same candidate are not asked the same questions, no matter where they are being interviewed, right? So that's what we ensure on our platform. And when we look at the same candidate would be interviewed by how many companies? And I thought maybe 2 or 3 or 4 when they are hunting for the job.
Yeah.
To our surprise, we found many people who interviewed on our platform 17 times. Maximum 17 was the maximum number.
Yeah.
Same candidate gave interview on our platform 17 times. Within around 5 to 6 months time frame, right?
Yeah.
So that's when you ask me that question, how many round of interviews for a given job, but the same candidate where they are hunting for the job, the max number that I saw, which was really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so fascinating thinking about the overall kind of transition or change into a lot of companies are looking at service-based organizations to help offload processes that are, I think a little bit more on the actual when they need them. When you need interview services when you're hiring, you need say development services, say for like an agency perspective, if you're building out a certain feature that's away from your core function. But you feel a lot of companies being very, very thoughtful and intentional about adding or purchasing services that they need in a certain point of time, but then offloading them when they're not needed. Have you seen that common trend with a lot of companies that you've been working with, seeing that they're offloading a big portion of that responsibility onto you, especially with the interview process? But do you see this continue to be more and more popular as companies find efficient ways to scale and grow their business without, say, hiring somebody internally as an HR person, doing all these interviews, and then trying to figure out what job function they should have after this big hiring push? What kind of trend are you seeing with companies, and do you think it's going to catch on in the future?
Sure. So what we have seen is, the churn on our platform is very, very minimal.
Yeah.
Having said that, depending on the size of the company, the startups who work with us, right, they usually get funded. They do a lot of hiring in this quarter or the next quarter, and then they kind of slow down a bit, right? Not a bit, but significantly, I would say.
Right.
They will hire a lot of people in one quarter, and then they will go quiet for a couple of quarters. Then they go for the next round, and again they hire a lot of people. So that kind of ups and downs we see with smaller companies and startups. For large services industry giants that we serve, pretty consistent in terms of, they are so diversified. They have so many different customers. We do see a lot of requirement month over month repeating for them, right? Another trend that we have seen recently is the companies like who do the nearshoring or offshoring.
Right.
When they present their their candidates to the hiring companies in US, they want to make sure that they just don't give just a resume, but a detailed and thorough interview report. So those we have seen a lot. We just had in January, we started working with Deal, which is a payment company for those 150 plus countries, right? So we are working with them now. When somebody is hiring, let's say a person in Bolivia or Ukraine, they want to make sure that, okay, I'm hiring somebody remote. Are they capable enough to do the job that I'm supposed to be giving it to them, right? So So we saw that. So a lot of interesting dynamics here. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Can an interview process ever be fully automated?
I don't think so. I'm a futurist, so I like to see like all sort of things coming up, but there is a human part which is essential in interviewing for probably semi-skilled jobs or part-time jobs. If you want somebody to just stack your Christmas trees just for November and December, maybe you automate that part. But if you are looking for knowledge workers, right, who can contribute, who can be creative, their human interaction is very, very important.
Yeah.
So I believe that I don't think that would be fully automated, at least not in near future.
Yeah. Yeah. I always like to ask this question because I love how founders extract any knowledge out of anything that they ingest, whether it was early in your career or now. What books or people have influenced you the most?
Great question. Yeah. So in terms of books, a book that would have influenced me the most is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, right?
Yeah.
And it has a lot of those, the talks over there is not just transactional solutions, but value-based to the level of spirituality, I would say.
Yeah.
So that book has definitely impacted me a lot. There is a book about interview with Dalai Lama about happiness, right? That has also a profound impact. And in terms of people, I was so fortunate to work with early on in my career. Ron Frederick, whom I worked with at the first job out of the college. He's the author of the first real-time protocol, so streaming-based protocols.
Yeah.
In early 90s, influenced a lot on my work style and coding style and whatnot, right? And then later on in my second startup where I was working, my hiring manager was Ed Bunyon, the founder of VMware, right? I worked with great people like J.R. Rivers and so on and so forth. So a lot of great people. Carlos Alonso, another great mentor that I came across in my early days, really shaped my thoughts, my leadership style, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. What's something that you are good at now, but you wish you were better at early on as a founder?
Oh, it has been a long learning journey.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are certain idealized versions that you have at the beginning, right? And one of those that I always had was that any person can learn anything and be productive if there is a wish, right?
Yeah.
But for a fast-paced startups, that's not the case. You have to make sure that people are also having the right aptitude for the kind of skills that the job demands. I'm not talking about the tools. I'm talking about specific aptitude towards certain skills. Like, for example, customer-facing skills. That's not anybody can learn that. It requires your own inherent implicit motivation.
Yeah. It's like matching not only the skills you have, but the interests and curiosity you have in a specific domain that actually kind of creates that, right?
Yeah, the presets that you are born with in some cases.
Yeah.
Some people have a great sense of humor and others don't. Doesn't mean that anybody can become a stand-up comedian, right?
Yeah. Definitely not me, but I masqueraded one around the apartment. No, that's what it is. I always like to ask before we ask for your plugs and your websites and your LinkedIn's. I always like to make sure that we didn't leave anything on the table. So is there any question that I didn't ask you that I should have, or that you would have liked to answer? Anything that we left on the table here?
Well, I think we have pretty much covered everything that we wanted to cover, I suppose. And yes, I think, good.
Yeah. Well, Mehul, last little bit is, where can we support you? Where can we support FloCareer? Give us not only your LinkedIn's, but your websites, your Twitters, wherever we can be a fan of you as a founder, but also your company and what you're building.
Sure. Yeah. You can find all of those links on our website. It's www.flocareer.com. It is FLO career, no W there, FLOcareer.com.
Amazing. Mehul, it's been such a pleasure not only learn about your experience in terms of the engineering teams that you've been a part of, what's worked, what hasn't worked, what you've gathered from big companies, but also how you've created such an ecosystem for companies to really offload a lot of the processes that, are not necessarily needing to have their ownership, but can be kind of automated, quote unquote, to a certain degree to help them run efficiently, run effectively, and hire people that are not only at a high velocity, but also match well with their organization and their objectives as teams. So it's such a pleasure learning about FloCareer. I hope you enjoyed yourself on the show, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me here.
Of course.